Hello, I'm the Reverend Joyce Caggiano. I'm going to preach on the lessons today from the fifth Sunday in Lent. And the lessons are from Ezekiel 37, 1 to 14, and John 11, 1 to 45. Let me begin with a phrase that came from Psalm 130. And the words are this: "Out of the depths have I called to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice." Oh my, if there's anything we need today is for God to hear our prayers. As we sit secluded in our homes wondering, when is this going to end? And whether we speak it or not, the question on our minds is often, why is this happening? There must be a reason. Who is God punishing? So let's begin this morning with the book of Ezekiel. So we have this wonderful story of the dry bones, and many of us can recall this famous hymn that children have sung, and we have sung, them bones, them dry bones. And this piece of scripture this morning is actually from the book of Ezekiel, and it is the valley of the dry bones. So here we have Ezekiel who finds himself in a valley, and in that valley are these dry bones, and the Lord comes to Ezekiel and speaks to him and tells him to make those bones come alive. And Ezekiel is puzzled, and he doesn't understand. And he does exactly what the Lord has asked him. And he goes to God and speaks through the Spirit of God and says that because God is God, these bones will get their sinews and they will the bones will come together and they will live. They will stand and they will multiply and they will be strong. And God said, when we put these bones together, I will put my spirit within you, and you shall live, and I will place you on your own soil, and you shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken and will act. How many of us are saying, God, have you spoken? And if you have spoken, is the coronavirus what you are telling us is our punishment? And I don't believe that, not for a minute. Unfortunately, a lot of people are saying things like that are not helpful and not good. So now I'm going to move us to the gospel, and I'm going to read through this story of Lazarus and the raising of Lazarus, and I'm going to comment as I read, and then conclude with some words of I'm offering. So now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, and he lived in the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And we're reminded that Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. We know that story from our Gospels. Her brother was Lazarus, and he was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus. The one that you love, this is the message, Lazarus is seriously ill. And we have this odd answer from Jesus. When Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Actually, that phrase we heard last week also. And many times we hear this in John's Gospel, that we may believe. That is why we have these stories and these reminders of what God has done for us. So, accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, Jesus stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now, that is very puzzling, because we ask ourselves, well, why didn't Jesus just pick up and go? So the gospel goes on. Then, after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." And the disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and you're going there again?" Because we know that Judea was very close to Jerusalem, and we know that Jesus is doomed once he gets to Jerusalem. But Jesus said to the disciples, Are there not 12 hours in the day? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, but they see by the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them. And this is a phrase to help us understand that the Spirit is leading, and it isn't about the physical light of the day or the darkness. And after saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep." Now, we don't know exactly, or the disciples didn't know exactly what he was trying to say. "But I am going there to awaken him." So is he going there to awaken him from sleep? We don't know the answer. So the disciples say to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he will be okay." And Jesus, however, had been speaking about Lazarus' death. But they thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I am not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him anyway." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us go, that we may die with him." This very brave and leading voice of Thomas. And when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. That's really dead. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console him about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. We know the story about Mary and Martha. They're in our Gospels frequently. And Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Martha is distrustful in the sense that she doesn't believe or understand the powers that Jesus has. "But even now I know that God will give whatever you ask of him." So she's now hanging on hopefulness. Maybe this will work. Maybe something can happen. So Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? So once again, we've got this gospel really pulling us to the belief that Jesus is the Messiah. And she said to him, Jesus, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. So one has to say, well, why don't you believe that I can raise Lazarus? So when she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up and quickly went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought she was going to the tomb to weep. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Again, distrust on the part of Mary. Martha was distrustful. Mary's distrustful. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, Where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. And now we have this beautiful phrase where in the gospel it says, Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how much Jesus loved Lazarus. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man, the man who'd been born blind, have kept this man from dying? And now you've got another group of people, the Jews, who are saying, wait a minute, if he could heal a blind man, why isn't he also healing his friend Lazarus, whom he loved? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. Now Jesus is very broken up. He's very sad. He really loves Lazarus. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he's been dead for 4 days. And Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, once again, that believe, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! The dead man came out. His hands and feet were bound with strips of cloth, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. What a story this is. My goodness. And isn't it relevant to us today? We are living in a time when people are dying. Many people are dying from the virus. and we're sitting here in our homes. We can't go out. We can't see our children because of the coronavirus. It has us in its grip. And it's really amazing how many people across the whole world are suffering. And the question is, once again, we asked, as I said in last week's sermon, is this God's punishment? I've heard people offering some pretty frightening explanations, blaming the country of China or our president. One person even suggested that God is sort of doing some house cleaning and getting rid of certain people in the world by killing them off, ridding the world of the chaff. I'm sure that each one of us can come up with the name of someone or something to blame. But that's really not what we're called to do as Christians. Remember, we are to experience the grace of God, which brings us to the joy of God and the joy in the world. So I'd like to suggest that there are 3 things that we can or should do. First, remember that only God can bring order to our unruly wills. That's in the collect. We need to stop looking for blame, for excuses. I think this, or I think it's because of that. Because those efforts only lead to our own destruction. They feed our anger and frustration and only reveal our unruliness. It's a temptation to wallow in blame and anger and frustration. It is not of God to think in those terms. It's not helpful. Second, instead, we need to open our hearts to God in a new and fervent way, a really true way, not just going to church, because we can't do that. But the church is a building, and we are a community, and that community doesn't go away just because we can't sit in pews together. Because God is where true joys are to be found. Again, another phrase from our collect. Third, we need to listen to this gospel, and if we do, we will understand that our tears, our sadness, our losses are shared. Here we have Jesus who wept. And everything that Jesus did, especially raising his beloved friend Lazarus out of his tomb, was done so that we may believe. And so, my friends, let us keep our hearts set on God. Accept the grace to love one another and receive the gift of joy, knowing that our faithfulness will get us to the other side of this, and we will go way beyond into the arms of God, and God will show us the way. Amen.